My name is Evan. I'm 27. I work in landscape maintenance, automatic irrigation, lawn care, sprinkler system repair, that sort of thing. It doesn't require dressing up or answering emails on time. It's about showing up at the right place, doing the right thing, and leaving behind nothing but a perfectly trimmed lawn, undyed plants, and leak-free plumbing. It's the kind of job that no one notices unless you do it wrong. I live in Bremerton, a small town about an hour's ferry ride from Seattle. I grew up surrounded by the smell of damp pine trees, moss-covered roofs, and gray skies. My dad was a plumber. He died 6 years ago in an accident while working the night shift. After that, I dropped out of college and started working outdoors. The morning started out like any other. Low clouds, cold air. I got a text from my boss. Special job, Bainbridge Island. Client requested caution. I typed the address into my map and went to work. I couldn't know, that quiet morning would be the beginning of something else entirely. Not a love affair, not exactly a loss, but something that would change me forever, though no one but me would ever know it. The ferry ride to Bainbridge Island took about 35 minutes. I sat in the car the entire time, watching the waves roll past the window and the mist cling to the windshield like spiderwebs. No calls, no texts. It was a quiet morning, as usual. Bainbridge Island is a place for people who have achieved everything, or are trying to pretend they have. The wooden houses are lakeside, with high roofs, gravel driveways, and gardens like magazines. This is not the kind of place I usually have a job. I drove along a winding road in the woods, my GPS guiding me to a secluded villa. The gate opened automatically when I stopped in front of the license plate. No bell, no security, just cameras and an ominous silence. The house appeared behind a row of tall pines. Scandinavian modernism, light wood walls, large glass windows, a flat roof covered in moss, surrounded by a large garden, not clearly fenced but separated by natural stones and low, winding trees. I got out of the car and checked my appointment slip. The client's name, Celeste Holloway. I had never heard of that name before, nor did I know who I was meeting. All I knew was that this was a discreet job, and I was best at making myself invisible. I walked to the front door, clipboard in hand, and tapped 3 times. The door opened slowly, almost silently. The woman stood in the doorway, the light behind her highlighting the soft curls of her dark brown hair that fell naturally around her shoulders. She was tall and slim, wearing a light gray sweater and simple jeans. Her feet were bare, with faded burgundy toenails. "Evan?" she asked, her voice low but soft. Not cold, not too intimate, the kind of sound that comes from someone used to silence. I nodded, holding out the appointment card. "I'm here to check the irrigation system and do some trimming." "Celeste Holloway?" She smiled slightly, not too quickly, not too widely. "It's me." I waited for her to extend her hand or turn away like her customers did, so I could make my way to the back garden. Instead, she leaned in, opening the door wider. "Would you like something to drink before we start? Tea? Water? There's cold coffee in the fridge." I paused. Her politeness wasn't formal. There was something more genuine, deliberate, an unhurried invitation. No hidden meaning, just a pause. "Tea, please," I said, a little awkwardly. "If you don't mind." "Not at all. Come in," she said. The house opened up to a spacious space, the smell of new pine and something like dried lavender hanging in the air. The interior was minimalist, light wood, low-hanging lamps, and abstract paintings in moss green and stone green. There was no television, no music, just the steady hum of the garden's sprinkler system. She poured tea into 2 black ceramic cups, then gestured toward the back porch. I followed, the warm cup in my hand. The backyard opened into a small but exquisite garden, asymmetrical, but intentional. The beds of purple flowers. The stone path leading to a bench under a red maple tree that was already starting to tint with autumn. "I don't grow roses," she said, as if reading my eyes. "They're pretty, but they're too dramatic." I didn't know how to respond. She looked at me, sipped her tea, and then continued, not looking directly at me, but as if speaking into the space in front of her. "You know, There are days when I just want someone to come into this garden, do their thing, and leave, but today isn't that day." I looked at her. Her eyes still didn't turn to me, but the words were pressed directly against my chest. I'll do it carefully," I whispered. This time, she smiled, more genuinely. "You can start when you're ready. Just consider this yours for a few hours." She stood up, brushing her hair behind her ear. Before turning back into the house, she said something so soft I wasn't sure I'd heard it right. "You're making it hard for me to keep my cover." I stood there, my cup of tea still warm in my hand. My mind raced through a series of possibilities. She was joking. She was testing me. She was just talking to herself. Whatever the case, I knew one thing. I had never been welcomed that way before. It took me almost a minute to actually get down to business. Though my hands were doing the usual things, checking the main faucet, testing the sprinkler system, checking the filter, my mind was somewhere else. Back on the wooden porch, next to the still warm cup of tea and that look that was neither sad nor inviting. I've met many people, homeowners who were busy, polite enough, or cold enough to make me invisible. But Celeste was different, not strange or eccentric, but purposeful. Like she knew exactly when to smile, when to keep quiet, and when to drop a line that made the other person's heart stop. That line, "You're making it hard for me to keep my cover," repeated in my head. Like a song with no ending. I didn't know what she meant. Maybe it was just a random remark. Maybe it was a test. Or maybe, and this is what I find most embarrassing, it's true. I'm not used to people like Celeste. Not used to the feeling of someone, literally looking at me. Not because I'm handsome, or interesting, but because they're curious, wanting to understand, or at least wanting to understand why I'm in their conversation. I remember my father, he used to be quiet like Celeste. When he stopped talking, I used to think he was angry. But later I realized he was just tired, and didn't want people to see it. Celeste had the same look in her eyes, like she was tired of pretending to be okay. Maybe I noticed it because I used to try too. When I mowed the lawn, adjusted the sprinkler, and packed up the tools, I moved faster than usual. Not because I wanted to leave early, but because I wanted to have time to stand still, quietly look at the garden one more time. Everything here seemed peaceful, but I could see in the way the bushes were half trimmed. The newly replanted trees, something unfinished. Just like its owner. I got into the car, but didn't rush to leave. I looked in the rearview mirror. Celeste was standing by the kitchen window. Not looking at me, but seeming to know I was still there. I started the engine, slowly backing out of the gate. Something inside me, something I thought had been dormant for a long time, had just stirred. 2 days later, I returned. Same winding, tree-lined drive, same automatic gate that opened silently. But this time, my heart was beating differently. When I got out of the car, Celeste was waiting on the back porch. She had a cup of something with a thin steam rising from it. She was wearing a dark blue turtleneck and a dark striped scarf. At first glance, she might have looked like she was about to sit down to read a book rather than entertain a gardener. "You're early," she said, as gently as the first time. "Habit," I said, taking off my gloves and getting out of the car. "I have a question, if you don't mind," she said, not getting straight to the gardening. I nodded. "Would it be strange if I told you not to do anything today, but just sit down and have dinner?" I was stunned for a moment. There was a soft wind blowing through the pines. The faint clang of metal against metal drifted from the kitchen. The question, though spoken softly, carrying a strange weight. "I've been cooking more than usual," she added, "and it's starting to get cold. I guess there's no rule against gardeners having dinner with their clients." I don't know why I nodded. Maybe it was because her eyes held no hope, only sincerity, as if I said no, she would be fine, but if I said yes, she could breathe a little easier. Inside, a warm yellow glow stretched from the kitchen to the dining room. The table was small but meticulously set, 2 sets of white china. Unscented candles, a gray linen tablecloth, there was fresh baked bread, a vegetable stew, and grilled salmon scented with lemon and dill. She poured me lemonade and white wine for herself. "I'm not stressed," she smiled. "Think of it as having dinner with a stranger on a train through a strange land. When the train stops, We go our separate ways. We ate in silence for a while. But it wasn't awkward. It was just that we both needed time to get used to the sudden closeness. She told me about her years as an architect, the buildings she'd painted, the cities she'd lived in, and the places she now had no desire to return to. I spent almost 20 years building houses for other people. Now I just want to keep a place that was safe enough for me. I told her about my father, about the old truck I'd inherited from him, about how I'd learned to work with my hands, not from books but from repeated failure. She listened without interrupting, without nodding politely, just being there. When the last plate was empty, she stood up to clean up but wouldn't let me help. "Don't ruin the painting," she said. "The guest eats, the host cleans. Tonight we keep the same role." Before I got up to leave, she turned to me and asked, as if suddenly remembering, "If I invited you back, not to garden, but just to chat, would you think I was strange?" I didn't answer right away, but this time, it didn't take me long to nod. I returned 2 days later, this time without the ladder or the tool bag. Celeste texted me, "Nothing to do today, just come if you're free. I've made some tea." It was a cloudy afternoon, with a light mist. Celeste's garden was silvery under the porch lights. She was sitting on the wooden steps, wearing a woolen robe, holding a steaming cup of tea. "Have you ever done something for no reason?" she asked as I sat down next to her. "Just because you felt you had to?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "I always plan ahead. I'm not good at surprises." She chuckled. "I used to be like that. Until one day the doctor told me not to plan too far ahead." The words came as lightly as the wind, but they stopped me. She put down her teacup, turned to me, her eyes straight and clear. "I want to drive out of here tonight. No destination, no map, just go, if you're not busy." I looked at her, looking for a joke, a test, but there was nothing but a dreamy seriousness, the kind of seriousness that comes from people who have lost enough to know that nothing is certain. I didn't nod. I just stood up, walked out into the parking lot, opened the door of my old truck, and she followed me, carrying the wind, and something began. We left Bainbridge just before 7. It wasn't quite dark yet, but the thick gray clouds had already drawn the curtain down over the forest. I drove, Celeste sitting next to me, her head tilted toward the window as if she were listening to the sounds outside rather than to me. No talking, no music, just the soft wind and the steady thrum of the engine, like a heartbeat that didn't want to be exposed. She didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't ask her. I turned onto a road hidden in a thick pine forest where I'd camped once when I was a kid. A few dozen miles from town. No cell service, no signs, just an empty lot now littered with rotting leaves. I stopped, turned off the engine, and the headlights went out, and the darkness swallowed us up at once. The air was thick with dampness and coolness. Celeste didn't seem surprised or uneasy, just tightened her coat and pulled her knees up onto the seat. Turning to me, more beautiful than any map, she whispered. I turned on the small overhead light in the car. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she began to talk, not as if telling a story, but as if letting the sound fill the space. "Do you know what it's like not to want to go home? Not because there's someone home, but because there's no one." I nodded, slowly. After my father died, coming home every day was like entering a place where time stood still. She turned to look at me. In the dim light, I saw something in her eyes that was both gentle and lost. "People say I'm good at overcoming, good at getting up, but I don't want to get up. I'm just tired of lying down." We sat like that, in the same lonely rhythm but no longer isolated. Neither of us rushed to interrupt the other's silence. We gave each other time to feel present. Not lovers, not friends, just two people, staying overnight without explanation. I opened the trunk and took out the thin blanket I used for night work. Spread it out on the hood. We sat closer together as the wind picked up. She leaned her head on my shoulder without asking, and I didn't pull away. "It's been a long time since I haven't thought about tomorrow," she said softly. Neither did I. When night fell, we still hadn't turned on the headlights. Only the faint glow of the moon behind the fast-moving clouds remained. No kisses, no excessive touching, just an arm draped over a shoulder. A warm breath in the cold, damp air. Not all intimacy needs to be named. I dropped her off near midnight. No one said much on the way back. She leaned her head against the glass door, eyes closed, her hand lightly touching her knee as if keeping the beat of a melody only she could hear. When the car stopped in front of the gate, she didn't rush to get out. She just turned around and said softly, "Thank you for not doing anything." I didn't understand right away. She smiled when she saw my expression. For not trying to fix me. For not rushing to touch me. For not asking if I was okay. She got out, the gate automatically closing behind her in a silent greeting. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the wooden chair on my balcony, looking at the cloudy sky that was still lit by the streetlights in the distance. In my coat pocket, I found a tiny silver hairpin. I didn't know if she had forgotten it or left it there on purpose. But it was there like a silent period, as if to tell me that that night was real. I didn't call, no texting, and neither did she. But for days afterward, I couldn't get out of the car without looking at the seat next to me. Not expecting to see anyone. Just to make sure that for once, someone was sitting there with me, silently. And very real. After that night, neither of us talked about seeing each other again. But somehow, it happened. I returned to Celeste's house that weekend with pruning shears in hand and a pitcher of lemonade she'd made ready on the patio table. No one mentioned the drive out of the woods. No one talked about the roles of client and worker. But from that day on, my visits to work began to last longer. And the greetings gradually turned into long conversations over cold tea. Our relationship had no labels. It wasn't love. It wasn't quite friendship. We didn't hug when we said hello. We didn't text goodnight. We didn't set expectations or ask questions. We were just there, when we both needed someone to be ourselves without having to explain ourselves. She once said, "You're like a room I don't have to arrange before I walk in." I didn't answer, but the words stayed with me for days. We walked in the garden. Sometimes went out to buy bread. Drove aimlessly down nameless streets. No one knew. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my colleagues. Not a single picture. No sign of what was going on other than two people trying to keep a little silence in a world that was too noisy. I think, if someone asked, I wouldn't know what to call it. But I knew. Every time I left her gate, I felt less burdened, and every time I returned, I needed no reason other than, I wanted to be there. One Tuesday morning, as I was timing the irrigation system in Celeste's backyard, the phone rang. It was Marcus, my direct supervisor at the landscaping company. He rarely called, unless there was a problem. I turned off the water, wiped my hands, and answered. "Evan," he said, trying to sound gentle, but there was something unnatural about his voice. "Do you have a few minutes?" "I'm in the middle of a job," I said, glancing toward the back porch, where Celeste was bending down to cut dead leaves from around the lavender bushes. "That's in Bainbridge, right?" I squeezed the phone. "Yeah, right." Marcus was silent for a few seconds, then exhaled. "I just got an email from a client in the area. Not Ms. Holloway, but a neighbor. They said, it seems you're spending undue time at the guest house." I didn't answer. I just looked at the muddy tips of my shoes. "I don't care about your personal life, Evan, but our company lives on reputation. You know, in areas like that, people watch everything. If something gets out, even a rumor, we'll lose the whole area. The whole Bainbridge line." I swallowed. "What should I do?" I asked. "I'm not asking you to avoid her. But remember who you are when you're wearing the company uniform. Don't do anything that gives people a reason to ask questions. If necessary, I'll put someone else on that line." I hung up and stood still for a long moment. The sky over Bainbridge was clear that day. The wind wasn't strong, but it was cold enough to wake me up. When I returned to the porch, Celeste had cleared the leaves and was making tea in the kitchen. She looked out, saw me still standing there. "What's wrong?" she asked through the glass. I shook my head. "No, just a little thing at work." She nodded, not asking any more questions. That afternoon, I left earlier than usual. Not because I was asked, but because I found myself starting to see things differently. Every time she smiled, I suddenly thought, what if someone saw? Every time we sat next to each other, I thought of the camera mounted on the lamppost a few feet from the fence. For the first time, I saw more than just the garden as a quiet place. I saw it as fragile. That night, I opened my phone, scrolled through old messages from Celeste but didn't reply. Instead, I clicked open the photo album, where I had taken a few pictures of maple leaves falling on her porch steps. Her hand holding a cup of tea. Her bare feet walking on the gravel path. We hadn't touched each other in so long. And yet, if I had just stood a little closer, I could have lost everything. I didn't come for 3 days. I didn't text, and I didn't receive any. But she was everywhere in my head, in the teacup in the kitchen, in the lavender scent at the grocery store, and in the silence between songs as I drove. I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping my distance, keeping my boundaries, protecting my work and her. It was raining hard on Wednesday morning. Rain was pounding against the windows of my office where I was checking my schedule. Marcus walked by, glanced at me, and asked, "Not going to Bainbridge today?" I shook my head. "Take the day off. Give me and the garden some breathing room." He nodded without saying more. But I didn't go home. I drove toward the island like a fugitive from my own mind. The gate was open as usual. But the house was quiet. Celeste was nowhere to be seen on the porch, nor in the kitchen. I walked around to the back garden, where the ground was still wet and the leaves were dripping with water. She was kneeling near the edge of the rocks, trying to move a chipped potted plant away. Her hair was slightly tangled, her coat damp from the rain. Her movements were slow, trembling slightly, but she tried to appear normal. "Celeste." I ran toward her, but before I could get close she staggered, then collapsed. I caught her before she hit the ground. She was panting, unable to speak. I carried her inside, laid her on the bench by the window, and covered her with a blanket. Her face was pale, but her eyes were wide. Not panicked, just tired. "I don't need a doctor," she said after a moment to catch her breath. "Just a few minutes." I sat down beside her, saying nothing. And then she spoke. "I knew you'd ask, so I'll tell you first." I didn't answer, just looked at her. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. Surgery, chemo, finished, then came back 6 months ago. A little metastasis, to the lungs. Not much, but enough to remind me. She smiled faintly. I didn't say anything because I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I didn't want to be the person everyone whispered behind my back. "She's sick." I wanted at least one person to face me without knowing anything. No reserve, no avoidance. I felt something catch in my throat. I had thought of every reason to stay away from her. But her illness, the only thing she had hidden, made me feel closer to her than ever. "Why are you still living alone?" I asked softly. "Why don't you go live with someone? A relative?" She closed her eyes slightly. "I had it all. Then it was gone. When people left because they couldn't bear the weight of it, I realized I just needed quiet. Not loneliness, just quiet." It was still raining. I made tea, put the cup beside her. She opened her eyes, looked at me. "I don't need your pity. If it's awkward, you can leave." I shook my head. "I'm not staying because I'm sorry. And I'm not leaving because I'm afraid." She smiled, for the first time that day. A real smile. Maybe the first in months. We sat there, not talking about my illness. Not talking about what was going to happen. Just sitting, drinking tea, listening to the rain tapping on the wooden roof and the leaves on the porch. Each drop was like a whisper between two people who had just revealed a truth that no one could take back. That evening, when I left, she walked me to the car as usual. Before I opened the door, she said, "Evan." I turned around. "If one day I'm not here anymore, don't think I'm leaving. It's just, I don't need to hide anymore." I didn't say anything, but I knew, from that moment, I would never look at that garden the same way again. A week later, I returned, scheduled. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. The gate was still open. The house as silent as a movie paused in the middle of a beautiful frame. I knocked lightly. No answer. But the door was unlocked. Celeste sat in an armchair by the fireplace in the living room. A wool blanket covering half her body. Her hair pulled back into a bun. Her skin paler than the last time I'd seen her. But her eyes were the same, bright, deep, and strangely calm. "I knew you'd come," she said, not surprised, not happy, just continuing something that had happened before. "I brought some tea," I said, holding out a small paper bag. "The chamomile you've been looking for." She smiled, nodded. "Make it." We sat across from each other. 2 old chairs, amid the crackling of the firewood and the reflection of the fire on the wooden walls. She didn't ask about the world outside. I didn't ask about what was to come. We both knew, tonight didn't require many words. Is it possible, she said after a long moment, that things are best when you don't try to name them? I looked at her, nodding slowly. I used to think I needed someone to fill the void. She continued, but it turns out, I just needed someone to sit next to me and not force me to hide it. I didn't go home that night. I gathered more wood, built a bigger fire. She dozed off for a while, her head tilted to one side, her chest rising and falling slightly. When I covered her up, she didn't open her eyes, but whispered loud enough for me to hear. Don't try to remember me by the light. Remember me by the peace you found sitting here. I stayed there until dawn. Not because I was afraid of losing her, but because I knew I had found a part of myself in that loss. I returned on Saturday, carrying a fresh tea bag, some rosemary, and an old book I thought she would like. The gate was still open. But this time, the door was locked. I knocked. No answer. I walked around to the garden. The potted plants were still in place. But something was different. It was as if no one had been out here for days. I called. The number was off. I waited for almost an hour, sitting on the steps, clutching the book. As I turned to leave, my eyes fell on the mailbox by the gate. Inside was a white envelope. No address, no stamp, just a small, slanted handwriting. Evan. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in black ink, the handwriting soft and straight like hand-drawn architecture. Evan, if you're reading this, I'm gone, not gone, but out of sight for a quieter place. I didn't say goodbye because we never had a clear goodbye. You were the one thing I didn't plan, and the one thing I don't regret. Thank you for the quiet nights, the unsweetened tea, and the presents that asked for nothing. I left him a small object in the drawer under the bench. It had no value, just something to remind me that someone had looked at me and not looked away. Celeste. I opened the drawer when I got back to the porch. Inside was a silver hairpin, the first one she'd ever dropped in my car. And at the bottom was a small note with 4 words on it. You stayed, thank you. I never told anyone about Celeste. Not because I was afraid of anything. It's just that, I don't think anyone understood where that connection began. Or how it ended. Maybe it never really began. It never ended clearly. We weren't a love story. There was no definition, no promise, no final farewell, but that's why I never forgot. There are people who pass through our lives as quietly as the morning dew, but leave an impression like the first ray of sunlight after a rainy season. And sometimes, the most profound thing is not in what we keep, but in the moments of peace that person leaves behind when they are no longer there. Thank you for staying to listen to my story. See you in the next story. Story from the Daily Unexpected Stories team.